Welcome to the Product Impact Podcast with our guest, Dr. Molly Sands, the head of Teamwork Lab at Atlassian. Today, we are tackling the most important problem facing everyone working with AI. How can we increase adoption and leverage this massively powerful and expensive technology to deliver actual productivity gains? So, the big takeaway from today's episode is that adoption is more difficult than Anthropic and your employer ever imagined. There are specific approaches that we know work, so let's dive into those. As part of creating reports for AI leadership with my business AI Value Acceleration, I've spent the last 6 months researching what's happening in the world's leading AI-powered organizations, as well as in mid-sized businesses. And we tend to assume that big companies are further ahead, but honestly, a lot of them are not. And here's the reality that almost every business is facing. AI adoption is uneven. There are a handful of people who are seeing 10x or even 20x gains, but most are only just starting to see some movement. And there's still a significant portion of the workforce that is drowning in forced change. They're just trying to keep up with tools and mandates that they don't feel equipped to handle. And part of why this is so hard is that AI isn't just a tool. It's more like being forced to work with an entire new workforce. So you need to train them, give them structure, know how to fix when something breaks, and be able to recognize when they are delivering you junk. And that's a real and demanding new skill set. And it lands on top of every other responsibility you're already carrying. And most organizations have seriously underestimated that burden and under-budgeted for it. From what I've been seeing, there are things that actually work, and they're not complicated, but they're often not happening consistently enough. So the organizations making real progress are inspiring their teams rather than just mandating AI use. Their leaders are leading by example, not just endorsing AI in an all hands, but using it openly, sharing their actual workflows, what those look like. They're being transparent about where they're failing. And they're building cultures where experimentation is genuinely encouraged. It's not just a buzzword. So this is where you can struggle out loud, where you are documenting your successes, but you're documenting failures for people to learn from. And you're building a shared knowledge base so that that learning compounds instead of disappearing when someone just walks out of the room. And they're honest about where they actually are in that AI journey. And that honesty can create permission for everyone else to stop pretending that they have it figured out for fear of what they'll look like. Where everyone is still struggling is harder to say clearly, but it is super important to talk about. One thing that you're going to start seeing a lot more is this idea of learning to work with context. This is a huge shift that's coming. And by context, I mean the background that you give your AI system so that it can actually do useful work. And this is what the task is, what we already know, what's not worked in the past, what a good output looks like, what the constraints are. So most people have never had to think that explicitly about their own work before. And I can tell you, it does not come naturally. And the incentives are either non-existent or they're fear-based. Like people are adopting AI because they're afraid of falling behind or they're afraid of being called out, not because there's a real reward for doing it well. And that's a terrible foundation for lasting habits. And adoption itself is just a poor measure of value creation. You can hit high adoption numbers and have almost nothing to show for it at a business level. Most organizations don't have a better metric, so they keep measuring the wrong thing. Now, before we get to consistent adoption and real value creation, there are a few things that have to get solved that haven't really been yet. Now, the 2026 struggle is real. The era of encouraging everyone to build everything with AI and just token max, use as many tokens as possible, is coming to a close. It is simply too expensive. And it doesn't show the same returns as an initiative for all workers that brings the floor up. More than that, we're coming to terms with the reality that most vibe coded applications, these are quickly assembled AI assisted builds without proper engineering review, are like a house of cards. They open businesses up to serious security risks, and governance and security, so deciding who can use what, how outputs get reviewed, what data gets shared, are essential. So the data is already showing that leadership who are overly gung-ho with AI are at least twice as likely to security risks. This is not acceptable. We have to figure this out. So unfortunately, most businesses have not properly thought about governance and security, or are looking at governance as being a blocker as opposed to what it actually can be, which is guardrails and framework to allow people to run faster. These teams are not equipped to manage an entirely new work stream like that. Most of all, very few businesses have something like a chief AI officer. Without someone in that seat who has the accountability and the mandate and the budget to be able to make sure that an organization's AI strategy is coherent and is working towards true business value, you just end up with a collection of independent experiments with no real connective tissue and a legacy of unusable agents and tools. And of course, there's always the risk of being replaced by AI, right? That's what I'm hearing from people at Meta and many others who have been worried about as their work and actions are being tracked to train these systems. What will it mean for them? But the more real situation happening inside organizations is this. The more we build with AI, the more we realize how unreliable most AI systems actually can be without a human watching over them. So Dan Schipper, the founder of Every, and honestly, one of the most clear-eyed writers on how AI actually works in practice, captured this on a recent episode of Lenny's podcast. And honestly, this is a conversation that Arpi and I have quite often too, is that when we build something with AI, it can be a huge benefit to our work, but it also pulls value out. So this means that, you still have to account for people who check that work, who fixes it when it breaks, because it will, who is monitoring to make sure that that automation or that output is what it says it should be. So there's a give and take here. And the reality of building with such a novel technology in 2026 is that it rarely works as planned unless you build it with intention, with a plan, with guardrails, and with proper governance, as well as a budget afforded to be able to monitor and oversee it. So these are all things most of us don't have time for as we balance all of our other responsibilities and try not to get replaced. And there's a heavier layer to all of this that we don't often talk openly enough about. We're being asked to learn new tools and change how we work, all while watching friends and colleagues get laid off around us. And that's a really strange and disorienting context in which to be told to just experiment and have fun with AI, right? And the secret is that in a year, simply adopting AI won't be enough to protect us, because that metric of what AI adoption or AI fluency is will continue to change as well as the industry standard changes. So what will matter is whether you can demonstrate demonstrable, measurable value, real outcomes, not just that you're using the tools. The workplace in 2027 is going to look very different from today. We are all going to need to learn how to manage AI the way a good manager manages a team of interns. You have to set direction, check the work, know when to step in yourself, which is exactly why we've been building out productimpactpod.com as a hub for resources to help you prepare for what's coming. So 3 pieces I want to put on your radar right now is first, a playbook for success that we built around Dan Schipper's AI predictions from his Lenny's podcast episode. These are practical steps grounded in where the data says things are heading. The second is a piece that's been getting a lot of attention called WTF is an AI native org anyway. So we put Airbnb and Meta's opposing approaches side by side and break down what each one actually means for how you lead a team. And third is a playbook specifically for knowledge workers navigating what a lot of people are quietly calling the AI job apocalypse. So go to productimpactpod.com for all of that. Plus our take on Apple's latest AI announcements or why Silicon Valley founders are betting everything on every knowledge worker becoming a 100x performer. And on the topic of learning how to get the most value out of AI, we're also building a training course about mastering context. So the key to getting the most value out of AI and what it means. If this is something that you're interested in, add a comment in this episode or go to productimpactpod.com and contact us. AI Value Acceleration is my consultancy where we work with businesses to identify the best value to scale the impact of AI. So please also feel free to contact me if you want to discuss your situation and we can map out solutions together. And now it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Molly Sands to the Product Impact Podcast.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us, Molly. So why don't you tell us, what has your team's research found about what is the state of teams and the future of teams?
So the State of Teams report this year, we really wanted to understand how people are experiencing AI work, unsurprisingly, right?
Yeah.
And what does that really look like? And what are the top teams doing differently to really get AI value? And what we found, we surveyed 12,000 knowledge workers across the globe. And then we also talked with 170 executives within Fortune 100 companies to understand how they're seeing value. And what we found is there's huge widespread AI adoption, and people and execs are feeling like things are moving faster. They are doing more things, but we are seeing a lot of coordination chaos within organizations. So even though everyone can do more and they can move fast, it is really difficult to get everyone aligned and moving in the right direction. And there are some teams that are doing that well, but overall, we estimated the cost of this, so the Fortune 500, that we're calling it the AI fragmentation tax. And it's this idea of if we are all moving quickly, but not in the same right direction, and how much time is that actually wasting? And we think it's costing the Fortune 500 alone $160 billion a year.
Wow. Okay. So what, you mentioned that the fragmentation is really around coordination. So what are the companies that are doing this well? What are the distinct ways in which they're coordinating so that they are seeing that value rather than losing that value?
Yeah. So one of the things that really stands out is that they're thinking about AI at the team level and really thinking about how do we take a workflow or process that lots of people currently touch and transform that so that it's really AI enabled. And so there's not so many handoffs. There's not quite as much of that coordination overhead that needs to happen, but also so everyone isn't just inventing their own totally new and different way of doing everything. There's a massive amount of value we get from working as a team, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can achieve much bigger things when we work together. And this is also true with AI, and it's certainly standing out in our data that when you think about that team level where 80% of the work actually happens, and you start to redesign things in that way, you see a lot greater ROI.
I've been seeing in my work in general, there's kind of two approaches that companies seem to be taking. One is either sort of workflow orchestration and saying, well, what are the people who are these power users doing that we can then elevate those workflows across different teams? And then the other area that's getting a lot of conversation lately is around sort of the flattening of these org charts or rewiring what used to be sort of team silos and creating almost more like pod structures. Are you seeing that either one of those two is more prominent in these companies that are more successful?
That's a really good question. So we are seeing more so, I would companies succeeding that are breaking down knowledge silos, that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone is working together in entirely different organizational structures. I would say that that's not the point in this transformation for large enterprises that we're at goals like that. But certainly when information is flowing across those across organizational boundaries, that is something we are seeing that is creating a much better ability to adopt AI in a successful way.
Okay. And how are you seeing these companies that are succeeding at AI sort of changing the structure of those teams or the ways in which those teams have to work, right? Because we're seeing in the data right now, there's kind of two separate areas that are issues, right? One is you have these junior people who are not getting the same job availability that there used to be because AI is taking on that kind of lower level, entry level work. But then we're also seeing, for example, with a lot of these announcements around Teamwork Graph, where you're going to be able to have a very junior person who can get access to senior level knowledge and context that they wouldn't have had previously. Are you seeing either of those patterns kind of coming to light, or is that more of a news story headline right now?
We've done research about early career folks within my team, and what we've seen a couple of patterns. So one is that this trend of the decrease in hiring actually started prior to the time that Gen AI really took off inside of companies. So some of this seems to predate that. There's certainly been a strong connection, and I can see a connection. Hey, there's like these tasks that AI might be really good at. Our goal of hiring junior people has always been to train them and to teach them and to teach them how to work in the ways that we work and to have a strong talent pipeline and to have a way that we can grow our company over time. So I do push back a little bit on the idea that like, what could we do with junior people? Well, maybe their jobs will look different. All our jobs are going to look different in the future. I think we have to be really honest and thoughtful about that, but we can absolutely still train junior employees on how to do lots of things that are very useful. And we find that they are really good with AI. So they're comfortable with AI, right? They use it a lot more. And they've come up in the really recent grads and learned to use it in college. They've been using it the last few years with everyone else. And so they're super comfortable with the technology. And I think that that is going to be a long-term advantage.
Yeah. Okay. And what would you say is something that surprised you the most in this study that you were working on?
That's a good question. Well, it didn't surprise me how much this is still an individual thing, this AI transformation, because we're all really talking about it, right? And yeah, most people are having access to tools at work and they're starting to explore it. But we're still not seeing across the board in our research that everyone is communicating about that or sharing how they're using AI. And I think that there's so much potential there that we really need to unlock together. And approaching it as a team is really important. With my team, we've done a couple customer innovation days where we've had customers that are using Rovo come in and just work with the Teamwork Lab. So all our behavioral scientists have mapped out processes with them and talked through, what are really the actual problems that you're facing in work and how could we put AI at solving some of those problems. And one of the things that surprised me in doing that experience was how good it felt to navigate this technology change with other people. Right?
Yeah.
This does not need to be an isolating experience. We can actually spend our time together thinking a lot more deeply about what's hard about work and then building together. And the amount that we're seeing non-technical people build and start to work in ways that are more similar to R&D teams, which is kind of my background, is really remarkable.
Do you find that, because I'm not sure if it's been shifting much in terms of these large enterprises around their approaches to having people participate in AI, but one of the things that I'm constantly hearing and I've seen myself is this idea of, well, you just need to experiment, you just need to try, we just need to give people access and let them play. But there's no structure, or there's rarely like a proper structure or purpose behind it. And so you have people that are kind of told, oh, well, just go find the time to do it. And they're fearful of what will happen to them if they don't find the time to do it. And it sort of puts this weird onus on the employee individually, which I think you were trying to allude to with saying it was a very individual, sort of lonely process. Are you seeing, or were you seeing that there was much of a difference in terms of the successful companies versus the ones that were maybe struggling a little bit more with AI value in terms of how they are training and incentivizing people to learn these technologies?
Yeah, there's a huge difference. So the culture matters a ton, both for how other people perceive your use of AI, but actually for teams figuring out how to get value from it. And we've done a lot of interesting things at Atlassian. So sometimes my team will run experiments where we'll have hundreds of employees within the company start to work in different ways. And then we look at all the data we have about them to understand how that impacts their work. And one of the things we did a while ago was introduce these AI working agreements. So we actually had teams sit down together and talk about a project that they were going to do and figure out how does AI fit into it. So like, what role does AI have? Are there certain areas where we're all going to use the same agent to do particular things? Are there, workflows that we want to do in a different way? And we found that this created a huge amount of clarity for people. It felt a lot better, and they actually used AI a lot more in those projects. And we see this in the large scale data teams study that we just did of companies all over the world. That same element of having a culture where you feel like you can experiment and you can ask questions, and some of that element of psychological safety is really, really important at this time, so that people feel comfortable to try. And then giving that point, which I think is what you're kind of alluding to, is like just saying go off and try it can actually feel really hard.
We were actually talking to someone who's like was one of the people who really created this idea of what DevOps is and why you need DevOps. And he was talking about how the idea of creating guardrails is actually just incredibly freeing, because then people know what they can, like how far they can go, and they know that they will be safe within what they're doing. And so I wonder if there's an opportunity, or if you're seeing a trend of companies that are kind of creating those way of working guardrails as well.
Yeah. Yeah. The more clarity around what you have access to, how you can use it, the more that people know where to go to ask questions, the better that teams tend to do with AI. We've been seeing that for quite a long time. Now, the last couple of years, that even just knowing where would I go in my organization to ask someone if I'm not sure if I can do this or not is hugely impactful. So it's not necessarily pushing lots and lots of policy, but creating that clarity and just helping people figure out the edge cases a lot. So companies that are doing that are more successful. And then we're also seeing a lot of desire to find blocks of time or events where people can experiment more. At Atlassian, we do an internal hackathon regularly called Ship It. And so as part of Ship It, my team will run experiments where we'll actually encourage people to use AI in different ways. And we've seen that impact for ways that they use AI following from those events too. We've also done like Builder Week within our product development teams. We've done AI days. I personally am a big fan of taking actual projects that you really are doing in your team and saying, hey, this should be an AI focused one. We should, extend the timeline by 2 days a week to figure out the scope of your project, what actually makes sense for your team, but giving people time when they're doing the real work, because that is where you want them to experiment, as well as in these more contained, hey, we know nobody's finishing it down tomorrow, but that's a small, that's pretty small compared to the size of this transformation, right? So think about adding a few days to a project to see if you can then, every time you do that repeatable process, get massive efficiency.
Has there been any evidence that you've seen in terms of the impact or lift that's happened from these Build It days?
Yeah, in terms of the lift that we see from some of these events, we've had specific cases where we have had really great innovations come from them. And so, for instance, we've redesigned our uh, technology that supports prototyping within Atlassian, which has been really helpful for making sure that those things are efficient. And so that's something that came out of our AI Builder Week. So we've certainly seen some really excellent use cases that we were able to scale across the company from some of that. And we've also done some research in my team to look at how leaders setting examples and having some of these moments with their teams. Like, for instance, we had leaders do offsite, did our entire people function, had an offsite, and we had demos from some of our product builders, like Sharif, who we talked to. And we found that that massively increased AI usage and that it did for a long period of time following. So each of these looks a little bit different in terms of what value we're seeing, but we are seeing both adoption as a key outcome here, and then we're seeing greater embeddedness within the workflows and a few pieces of really interesting innovation that others do not.
One of the areas that I've seen oftentimes is like the make or break for enterprises in particular is that sort of behavioral layer, is how comfortable employees feel to actually utilize these technologies. And more importantly, is how accessible is it for them to learn from the people who are doing it well? So removing that stigma, but also removing that fear of doing it wrong or that fear of not knowing if you're doing it right.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like those events have helped you to overcome that behavioral barrier.
Yeah. And with the AI working agreements thing I was talking about, we found that people were significantly more likely to have a new idea that they were implementing with AI. Like they were using AI in a new way following those team discussions. The State of Teams report is really useful as a source for thinking about how you become a more mature AI-enabled organization that is seeing real value. So I would definitely recommend that people do check that out. But certainly when we think about maturity, part of what we're thinking about is going from that individual experience to AI embedded in real repeatable things that we do all the time, right? So it's certainly prompting, asking questions, that's all fantastic. That should happen. We're all getting faster in that way. I think a lot of companies are catching up on that pretty quickly. But then as we flow throughout that maturity curve, we're really able to start to see systems working in a different way. And I think this is a bit of what you were talking about of actually building out use cases or infrastructure that everyone can leverage, right? So maybe it feels less like I'm going to go use AI now, and more that the way that I do my work is naturally embedded in these AI platforms, and that orchestration layer of level that we'd like to get to is really around people then moving in the same direction very fast because they fully are enabled by AI, and it's woven throughout the work experience. And that's becoming more and more of a reality.
Were you seeing much of a distinct difference between, so the two highest levels of that maturity scale were automation and then orchestration being sort of the top level? Have you been seeing much of a difference in how organizations who are more mature are they often getting stuck at that sort of automating space, or are you seeing more of them actually being able to get to that orchestration where they can have multiple agents who can be running more systems versus just automating particular parts of workflows?
Yeah, so it's not happening at the same rate across every company, right? So there's usually pockets of the company that are pulling ahead, and then other people are catching up. And so we're kind of seeing, I almost think of it as waves, right? And I think that's normal in any sort of transformation and healthy because you see what's ahead. But if you're able to capture some of the further along that maturity curve, and then pull others up that direction. But yeah, I think most companies have a long way to go before they're at that orchestration.
Yeah, I mean, all of the headlines like to say now, like 2026 is the year of the agent. It's going to be like the year of orchestration. Do you feel like, from what you've seen of all of the companies that you've been talking to, that is somewhat true? or it's been more of like a hype sensationalized claim?
So I think technology there, and there's a lot that we can do with it. But, most people are using agents to mean wildly different things at this time.
Yeah.
And we do see that show up in our research. And I think getting that human piece of transformation, right, is hopefully a place that we will see a lot more focus that's coming.
Okay.
And I don't think it's unrealistic to think that we will be able to automate more things in that we currently can.
Yeah. Okay. Final question. We're sitting here again 1 year from now. What is something that you hope that in the 2027 State of Teams report that you were able to explore or answer that you weren't able to this year?
Oh, I love this question. Okay. I'm very interested in decision making and hierarchies and how that's going to play out.
Okay.
So, both with people and agents, there's a lot of decisions that need to be made, right? And as we move faster, that puts more pressure on the processes that companies have usually used. And I think that there's a lot we would like to learn this year about how you assemble teams in the best way in this new world where we have so many more capabilities available to everyone, and then how we keep everyone able to move forward. Because we're going to see pressure points emerging in all sorts of different places in work as AI capabilities are more broadly adopted within cloud companies. And so that's something I'm very excited to, hopefully have better answers for on next year.
Thank you for listening to the Product Impact Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow us and leave a comment to inform the conversation.